Hey, welcome in.
Welcome to the Arrowhead Addict podcast.
We are here coming to you live.
The Kansas City Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You only win a Super Bowl 2 times every 5 years, right? Oh! The warm-up act is over. Let's bring in Melissa Etheridge, massive Chiefs fan. Melissa,
Super Bowl champion, 2-time Pro Bowler, and Trent Green. Trent Green, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
And he picked it up! He picked it up! He's gonna score!
and we'll see you next week. But until then, as always, go Chiefs.
Welcome into the Intangibles podcast, a new Arrowhead Addict podcast. My name is Price Carter, and I am joined by always, it's my good friend, Christian Ainsworth. Christian, happy Monday to you.
Thanks, man. Happy Monday to you, too. How's the traveling going?
It's good. I'm behind enemy lines here for a little bit of work. I'm in Denver. I always make sure, I don't have it on right now because I kind of got an egghead. Not a great looking hat person, but I do have my most recent Chiefs Super Bowl champions hat that I'm planning on wearing after I'm done with work today. So always got to make sure I get a lot of Chiefs gear when I'm in Denver. I was in a Walmart earlier, and there's like this little pathetic section of Broncos gear, which is fine. It's a Walmart, right? But they've got like Cortland Sutton jerseys. Ooh, like what a great time. When Cortland Sutton's your best player or one of the more recognizable players for your franchise, it's a dark time in Broncos country. Which, speaking of AFC West teams, have you, recently mocked someone with a Muppet in your free time? Maybe your greatest enemy. Have you done that recently, Christian?
I have not done that, although it is on my to-do list. So we'll see if that gets done before this week gets out. But, dude, can you believe they did that? I mean, to mock the greatest player of all time it's a move for sure.
I've never been so confident in like a beatdown of a team than the Chiefs against the Raiders this year. And I was listening to someone who's from the Las Vegas area, and Trey Taylor was the player who did that, who's 7th round player out of Air Force. And by all accounts, he sounds like an absolutely great guy, tremendous leader. Obviously, he's a service member being from Air Force. He's a dude. Like he's a stud at Air Force. With all that being said, my guy, you are always on camera. Where are you in the world today that you're not on camera? If you think you're doing something, you're not on camera, you're probably wrong. Security cameras, phone cameras, it's everywhere, right? And like just have a shred of self-awareness. And then I heard someone say like, oh, well, he didn't really know what he was doing. Like he didn't know that they were going to be video camming. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was quoting the quarterback documentary with the I'm here. And I get it. It's not really that disrespectful. It's not like they said like, oh, he sucks or he's not a good player. But still, like this man, he's got Jordan level motivation. Patrick Mahomes does. And in case you're curious, we're talking about the Raiders player who had the Kermit the Frog Muppet, which I assume the whole world has seen by now. But like he looks for anything, right? Like Jordan like literally made up stories to motivate himself in games. And I think we probably get Patrick Mahomes' best in almost every single game. But the fact that you gave his teammates something else to be motivated about too, I'm very confident in the Chiefs in those two matchups.
You know, it's weird though, right? Because they don't have anything to lose. I mean, what have they won? Like one game in the past 4 or 5 seasons against us. So it's like, at some point, look for the edge, I guess. Maybe that's how they're going to sell it. But
that team and that roster, like you got 2 quarterbacks there, which means you have none. You have a lot of offense and a defense that doesn't have a lot to show for. And the coaching staff, like Luke Getsy's the offensive coordinator. I don't know. I have very low confidence in interim head coaches. If you go back and look at the stretch that the Raiders played well last year, the quarterbacks are like Zach Wilson, Tommy DeVito, the worst game of Patrick Mahomes' career. Jared Stidham. Like it's that run that got him hired is really pretty lackluster as far as quarterback play goes. So Patrick Mahomes is 10-2 against the Raiders in his career. So whatever, you come at the king, you best not miss. So best of luck to them. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. Today, we're going to be going over our roster projections. My roster projection 1.0 is out, and it's live on the website, arrowheadaddict.com. I'm going to be reading my roster projections to Christian, and he's going to be letting me know where I got it right, where I got it wrong, and then we'll also sprinkle in some more camp headlines and news. And then in this later part of the podcast, we are going to be going over the 5 most impactful moves of the Chiefs dynasty. So the biggest, most impactful moves that the Chiefs have had since 2019 to today. But first, Christian, I want to ask you a question. Hollywood Brown, he's missed the last couple of days of practice due to illness, but he's looked great in camp. What would you say? Would you go over or under on him for 750 yards for the season?
750? Dude, I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but I think like maybe close to doubling that is not out of the question. I know there are a lot of mouths to feed. Travis Kelce's taking a step back. Like, I have no problem banging the over on that.
Well, it sounds like you need to hook up with DraftKings Sportbook because Hollywood Brown's over and under receiving yards on the season is 750 yards. So it sounds like that should just be an easy money factory for you. Which reminds me, hey, Chiefs fans, DraftKings is offering a fantastic sign-up bonus for our new users. New customers can place a $5 first bet on any sport to instantly claim $100 in bonus bets when you sign up with our code Arrowhead. The best part is that you will receive your rewards even if your bet loses. Using the code Arrowhead not only gets you these bonuses, but it also directly supports our podcast. If you've been considering signing up for DraftKings, make sure to use the code Arrowhead to maximize your first bets. This offer is only available to new customers who are 21 plus and older and physically present in legal gambling states. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. Check the episode and description for full terms of the offer and to see if you qualify. Double. Wow, double. You double. You think he's getting like 1,400 yards this season?
Honestly, yeah. I mean,
he's only eclipsed that mark twice in his career, like over 750. And 1 year was like 790, and then it was like 1,000 and change.
He hasn't played with a real quarterback yet. Give him a real quarterback, and he'll put up a bunch of yards.
I absolutely hope you're right. Like I'm all for it. Like, let's get a good 1,600, 12 touchdown season out of Hollywood Brown. I'm all for it. Okay, well, speaking of hoping in the future and all those things, there's a lot of Chiefs players right now that are hoping to make the 53-man roster. Reminder, back the way things used to be, we used to have like these cut down days where the roster had to get to a certain number and to smaller and smaller until eventually got to 53. Now they just do it all in one foul swoop. So it makes roster projections a little bit more entertaining, a little bit more dramatic because we're trying to figure out where the cuts are happening, where they're not. So as I said, today I'm going to be going over my roster projections that are live on the site. And Christian's going to let me know where I got it right, where I got it wrong. Some of these, there's not a lot of news, right? There's some of these that are a little bit more up for debate. So you tell me, if you think I left a player off who shouldn't be left off, or a player that maybe you think is higher up on that list than I'm listing them. So to start with, probably the least controversial, it's quarterback. Patrick Mahomes and Carson Wentz are the 2 quarterbacks I have making the roster. I don't think there's much debate there, right?
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's been like 50-50 between Ian Book and Chris Oladokun as far as who's the practice squad quarterback going to be. I know Oladokun's been on the roster a little bit longer. Wouldn't be surprised if it's either one of those. Frankly, we hope to never have to talk about them again. I will say, though, is Carson Wentz the best backup quarterback the Chiefs have had since it was Patrick Mahomes?
Seems a little disrespectful to Chad Henne, but I could go there with you, I guess.
Well, here's the thing about Chad Henne. I thought Chad Henne was very good as a backup quarterback. Really admirable for everything he did and played really well. But if you're asking who has the higher ceiling, like, well into his 30s, Chad Henne or Carson Wentz, I mean, I still think Carson Wentz probably has the more pure raw talent. Agree?
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. He was an MVP candidate his that season he had with the Eagles. But like, no, my whole thing is like a backup quarterback, what you really want him to be is stable. Like good locker room guy who's got the cap on the sidelines, sort of like a pseudo quarterback coach. It's like, I mean, Carson Wentz has been a little bit of a controversy any place that he's ever been. So, bringing him in here, I think that, it kind of gives us a better ceiling maybe at the backup quarterback position. But like, how much of that do you really need? I mean, best case scenario is Patrick Mahomes plays every single game of the season except for like the last 1 or 2. And we don't really need the wins there. So I'm firmly I'm still on the Chad Henne train. He did incredibly well while he was here. That 99-yard drive is just, I replay it every night before I go to sleep. Like the dude was a baller.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think what you're talking about is the difference between like being a professional backup quarterback and being a starting quarterback. Carson Wentz is certainly a below average starting quarterback in the league. That's been proved pretty consistently at this point. But I think now he's kind of entering that Chase Daniel phase of his career where he's learning like how to be a backup and what that job means. And honestly, if you listen to any Chase Daniels stuff, it takes being a real consummate professional to sit on the bench 16 games out of the year. And then when it's your turn to come in and command the offense, command the huddle, and be the most important position on the field. So I do think that Carson Wentz has got some growing to do in that area, I'm sure. But I think overall talent-wise, probably feels about as good as any backup quarterback situation we've had here in Kansas City. Certainly improved over last year. We got a super chat here from Rob Miller. What's so funny is losing to Minnesota 3-0. That's really funny. #Raiders. So that's that game like set football back 4 or 5 years, right? That happened this year. And this is like kind of brings up the point further, right? They go and draft Brock Bowers. We're talking about the Raiders here. They have all these offensive weapons, but the game that they beat the Chiefs this year, they didn't complete a pass in the second half. If that's your blueprint for beating the Chiefs, whose offense is far improved this offseason, good luck to you. You've got Patrick Mahomes rules. They're related to the Michael Jordan Bulls and Pistons. Good luck to you. So just keep putting up bulletin board material. We'll absolutely take it. Okay. Back to our roster projections. Running back. So this one's a little interesting. I think that there might be a new running back too here in Kansas City. But for making the rosters, I have Isaiah Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Deneric Prince. But Christian, it sounds like Deneric Prince has been taking a majority of the running back 2 reps, especially with Clyde Edwards-Helaire being in and out of practice.
Yeah, that certainly is news to me. I've been keeping up fairly well with the Chiefs practices this past week, but I had not heard that, if you can believe it. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, if we're talking ceiling, like athleticism, like stoutness, ability, Deneric Prince is our running back too. But I think that the familiarity with the offense, I think Clyde's going to kind of, get in front of him there towards the end of this camp and see. I just can't see Deneric Prince being our RB2 with so much. And it's not a deep position, but we got plenty of talent there. I mean, Clyde was a first-round pick for a reason. Like Jerick McKinnon is out. Like he should slot right in, right?
Well, I think one thing, we're talking about 2 different things here, right? First, we're talking about the quantity of backs that they're keeping. They've kept 3 to 4 backs these last couple of years. I think with Prince, I think it's going to come down to pass protection. They are definitely looking for that passing down back. There was some talk really early in the offseason that maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to take a step up into that role. He had his best receiving yardage total in the last couple of years with the team, but the pass protection is a big part of it. And we've seen this from Prince before too, right? Last year was kind of a camp darling. I remember at this time last year just thinking he was an automatic lock to make the roster. He did not make the roster out of camp. He was active a few game days via call-up, but more often than not, he was not on the active roster. So I think one thing that is relevant here is I don't project for them to have a fullback. I know some people want to slot Carson Steele into that spot, the running back out of UCLA, who's an undrafted free agent. He's a bigger bodied guy. I'm not sure that he is going to be able to fill that role fully like a Michael Burton or Anthony Sherman did. And I don't know that he's making it as a straight running back, but I do think if there's a spot that I'm wrong here, it's potentially 4 running backs instead of 3 with Carson Steele, or my next spot, tight end, 4 tight ends or 3 tight ends. I think that they have shown the propensity that if they want to put someone in the back, like an H-back, or have a 2-back set, that they might put that 4th tight end, like an Irv Smith, I think has been running out of the backfield some, or Carson Steele. I do think that that's a potential spot that like I might have wrong. It also sounds like, there's some buzz around Imani Bailey, the TCU UDFA running back that was brought in. I've not really seen a lot around him. Right now, I feel pretty firm that like majority of the carries in this offense are going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Isaiah Pacheco, and Deneric Prince.
Yeah, no, and that we can agree on. Like Deneric Prince has kind of been that. Who was that guy we had a few years ago? But like Spencer Ware, was that first name? I always think
Spencer Ware.
Okay, like that guy that can kind of step in. Not really somebody that we're looking for, like a Sharkandrick West type of guy who is firmly planted on the roster, has the trust of the coaches, but just doesn't see as many reps because I don't think that he, his ceiling is as high as Isaiah Pacheco or the investment is as high as Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And we can shit talk Clyde Edwards-Helaire all we want. Like he's not being used right, in my opinion. I don't think that his ceiling is necessarily as high as it could be, but Deneric Prince, RB2, it's a take, man. It's a take.
Yeah, well, and I mean, let's be real here too. None of us would be surprised if like Jerick McKinnon is walking down the hill in pads tomorrow in St. Joe too, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
if he's going anywhere, it's going to be Kansas City. So we'll see about that. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slot. That is going to be wide receivers. So this one, I ended up going with 7 receivers again. I was a little surprised I did, but I think the special teams element here is where it sticks out. So I've got Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Justin Watson, Kadarius Toney, McCole Hardman, and Nico Remigio. Some names that you did not hear me list there is Sky Moore and Justin Ross.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable take. I mean, Sky, from the moment he was drafted, has kind of been one of those like back shelf guys. I mean, we saw what Rashee Rice looked like his first season. It's not even comparable, the impact that the two players had on the team. He is a guy that I think we spent a 3rd round pick on. The investment is still pretty high for us. It's kind of like, okay, or was it did we spend a second on him?
Yep, 2nd round pick.
I was going to say, yeah, it might have been a second.
One of the picks from the Tyreek Hill trade.
Yeah, so the investment is high. Like, we have a year left of him. He's another guy I think that could kind of beat out Remigio. Like, I understand the Remigio hype is real, and he's been an absolute stud in camp, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you're a star in camp. We've seen it time and time again. That does not mean it's going to translate. And unfortunately, in a league that is mostly driven by, investment and opportunity, we just haven't invested that much in Remigio. And that's an unfortunate truth for a lot of guys that are kind of bubble or out competing the guys who were 1st or 2nd round draft picks. But Sky Moore still has a place in this offense. Now he has to step up and take it, but I mean, again, we're kind of splitting hairs here at the end. Like, do you take the investment over Sky Moore? Do you take the investment with Sky Moore, over the Remigio thing? I think it could be just a hand-in-hand thing. I don't think either of us are wrong. You just have a little bit more, invest. You just believe a little bit more in Remigio than you do in Sky. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I think a couple things there, right? Like, I think one thing that we can give credit to this front office, Brett Veach and his staff, is that they've been able to admit when they're wrong, and they don't just cling to their priors. Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of feels like that a little bit, where like, why is he still around? Is it because he was one of their 1st round picks? But this team moved on from Breeland Speaks pretty quickly after being a 2nd round pick, right? They're willing to admit when they've made mistakes on players. I do think that with Sky Moore, I do think that someone else might look at him and say, hey, we can get more out of him. And to be fair, the Chiefs really haven't used a player like Sky Moore in their offense almost at all. Like, if you think about what Sky Moore does well, it's a decent release package. It's some ability after the catch. And when he came out of college, catching was one of his strong suits. One of the bigger set of hands in the draft that year. And he's really fought the ball here these past couple of years here in Kansas City. But I think that there could be a team that like, hey, let's flip a conditional 7th or a conditional 6th or day 3 pick swap and get him in here and see if we can get something else out of him, because draft stock does follow you around. So I do think that there might be a team that they're able to do that. If they can trade Amir Smith-Marset after like 3 good preseason games, they can trade Sky Moore, who is a 2nd round pick. I know a lot of people see that and like, oh, no one's trading for Sky Moore. Why would they ever trade? Like, we get it. His stock is low. At this point, if you're the Chiefs, you're just looking to, 1, trade the salary he has, which, he's a 2nd round pick. It's not nothing. And then 2, get some value out of it, right? So that's something that could potentially be there. Also, Justin Ross, I don't have on there. I know he's everyone's favorite. He's one that I could see a little bit. Like, the one thing about my list of wide receivers, besides having 7, which might be a wrong number, like they could go with 6 or 5, I think they suffered from having too many wide receivers on the roster at times early in the year. That rotation was too much and guys weren't getting enough consistent play. But I do think we've got a lot of small, shifty slot guys, right? Like we talked about Worthy running on the slot. We know Hollywood Brown can do that as well. Both those guys can also line up on the outside. You've got Kadarius Toney, who, is more of a manufactured design touch. Remigio is smaller, probably a slot guy. Kelsey needs to get in there as well, too. You have a ton of guys who are all kind of that small, undersized. You still got McCole. If they wanted to go with a bigger body of Ross, even if it's just like a run blocking thing at the receiver position, and then in the red zone, like that could be an avenue I could see to him making it. He did make the roster last year and did contribute on special teams. Now, I don't think he's a key contributor, but he did contribute.
Yeah, and I think kind of going under the radar here, Kadarius Toney, like just seeing all the highlights we've seen of him over the past couple of weeks is enough for me to firmly put him in the wide receiver rotation. He was a guy that like had a historically bad season for any wide receiver last year. Completely lost the trust of Mahomes, completely lost the trust of Andy Reid. Like, but he's still a guy. He was a first round pick for a reason. If nothing else, he could be a weapon. And Andy
fully
utilizes
guaranteed salary this year too. Fully guaranteed salary this year too. So like, if you're cutting him, you're paying him either way. So he might as well be here. Yes, it does sound like he's gotten into the first team offense quite a bit and has like been targeted quite a bit. And if he's your like 7th or 8th option in an offense, you're doing pretty well. But if he starts some of those shenanigans again with the ball, like he was just unplayable last year, right? I mean, you could argue he might have been directly the cause of like 2 games that were direct correlations to losses. So he's got to be better, but there is a skill set there that raises his floor over Sky Moore. And we've talked about that quite a bit. All right, let's go to the offensive line. Not a lot of surprises here. The offensive line, I have Jawan Taylor, Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, Joe Tooney, Wanya Morris, Kingsley Suamataia, Mike Caliendo, Hunter Norzad, and CJ Hansen. That's 9 offensive linemen. Traditionally, the Chiefs have floated between 9 and 10 offensive linemen on the roster. The only piece of news that might be there is that Lucas Niang's name was not read. They're mixing him in at guard some this camp. That kind of feels like they're just trying to see if there's anything here. Is there anything left of value on this? He's on the last year of his deal, which it seems crazy he's still here because he took that COVID year. But it does sound like, 9 to 10 is probably around that number. And also Kingsley Suamataia has been running predominantly with the first team almost exclusively since the pads have come on.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a surprise, the Suamataia news. But everything else, I mean, that's pretty textbook. A lot of those guys, are slotted in from last year, have lots of upside, and are going to be contributors. I mean, I can't argue with any of that. Niang, maybe. But at this point, I mean, he missed a season due to COVID. He hasn't really been an impact guy. It's like, at some point you got to get off the train.
Yeah, you got 4 tackles, 5 interior guys. CJ Hansen's one, like probably a fringe guy. Like, could he make the practice squad? Kind of depends on how you feel about him in camp and those type of things. We talked a little bit that Norzad has worked at tackle just a slight bit in this camp too. So maybe he's your 5th tackle if for some reason that you do need it. But if it feels like a pretty good group, and Joe Tooney did return to practice in a limited capacity today. He wasn't running exclusively like in the offense yet, but he's been cleared. He's been removed from the PUP list. Good sign there, especially if you're Kingsley Suamataia. Does sound like Suamataia pass protection wise, that's where he's struggling, which we talked about that a little bit. Only 201 true pass sets at BYU, predominant RPO offense out there. That's the place where he's going to struggle, but the run blocking is exciting. He's really good at sealing that backside off. You can see the athleticism pop. Sounds like he's got a step ahead against Wanya Morris in that aspect compared to his game. So good things are happening. I feel like you got to be pretty excited about that if you're a Chiefs fan.
Oh, yeah,
right,
absolutely. And if he just gives you like OBJ level contributions his rookie year, like that's perfect. Then your pick is paid off. If he's just a run blocking offensive tackle, that's all you need him to be.
Yeah, and getting that consistency down with Joe Tooney, it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the interior defensive line. This is probably one of the more difficult spots to predict because there are so many bodies here. The Chiefs really kind of threw numbers at this position this year. There's a definitive need. I think, as I start doing some mock drafts for the 2025 season, start taking a look at some prospects, interior defensive line is going to be one of the first places I go because of the lack of depth here. Chris Jones, obviously, a very wealthy man, recently locked up by the Chiefs. He's making the roster. We've got Derek Nottie, Tershawn Wharton, Neil Farrell, Fabian Lovett, the UDFA out of Florida State, and Mike Pennell. So that gives you 6 interior defensive linemen. Also noteworthy, Chris Jones has missed the last couple of days with a groin injury. That's something that's cropped up for him over the years. Honestly, these might just be vet rest days. It doesn't sound serious, but it is noteworthy. So we've got 6 interior defensive linemen. Most notable name not in that list is Matt Dickerson. Your thoughts, Christian?
Yeah, I mean, pretty textbook. Interior defensive line is a position that we've needed for a while. Outside of Chris Jones, we're kind of looking at role players and niche sort of special guys that can come on the roster and do one thing. Interior defensive line is going to be a need in the upcoming draft. I don't like where the position is at completely right now, but all those names sound fine. I wouldn't be surprised if we had another addition at some point, either during the offseason or early into the regular season of this year. Like, it's just one of those positions that's like, you don't really notice how important it is if you're just, just watching the games. But then you look into the film and it's like, oh, Derek Nottie is actually really important. Like his ability to stop the run. We have nickel defense out on the field. It's like that guy's maybe the most important player on the field during those possessions. And it's like, it's something that I know that the coaches don't take for granted, but it looks like it's something that maybe Brett Veach has overlooked in the draft. But again, this is just a preliminary like Chiefs roster prediction. It's not like everything's set in stone. I could see him making a move, but yeah, all those names look good to me.
Planting my flag on the ground right now. I said Xavier Worthy was going to be a Chief in September of last year. Dante Corleone, the interior defensive lineman out of Cincinnati, the Godfather, as they call him, Dante Corleone, Chief. He's a Chief. Okay, interior defensive lineman, first or second round. That's my call. You heard it here first on the Intangibles. Okay, moving on from things that are not over a year away. Edge defenders. This one was tricky because of the injury to Charles Omenihu, so I don't have his name listed here, but that's because he's on the PUP. Also, BJ Thompson has not practiced at all. He's still on the NFI list from that scary medical situation that occurred during OTAs. We don't really know what the story is there, right? We're not going to speculate. He could come down to practice tomorrow, or he might not practice at all. So for now, we're just going to assume that he's remaining on NFI and wishing him the best. So for our edge defenders, George Karlaftis, Felix Anaduke-Uzama, Mike Dana, and Malik Herring are just the 4 edge players we have. Little thin crop there with only 4. Do you think that they keep a 5th maybe? And if not, like, what do you think about the edge group?
It's just a real shame that BJ Thompson is a guy that kind of got, had a really rough offseason because he would slot in here so well, like just a pass rush specialist we can put out there on early or late downs. Other than that, I mean, who else do we even have on the roster that could come in and play actual snaps? Like Malik Herring, he came out of Georgia. He was a really good player, but he hasn't been what we thought he was going to be, or even what he was slated to be in the draft. So FAU has to take another step forward as well. He's another guy that we're looking at to make a big jump, and it looks like he's kind of made a jump already during these OTAs. But we got to see it on the field, and it, like you said, it's a very, very shallow pool here for talent that we have on the roster. But who else are we going to put in there? I mean, you can't argue with that list if you don't have somebody else you can add in. Malik Herring has played downs in the NFL and has been okay.
Herring played 33% of the snaps last year on defense, so he's going to contribute. I think you're fine with what he's done. Obviously, he's not a player that you want to get more snaps out of, but he'll probably be on that same trajectory. This will look better when Omenihu's here. Also, keep in mind, Karlaftis has been kind of an Iron Man when it comes to snaps. Like, he plays a lot of snaps. Chris Jones has that flexibility to kick out to the edge, and also the Chiefs do quite a few fronts where they've got 3 defensive linemen down, and then a linebacker walks up and acts as a 4th edge player or a 4th defensive lineman in the box or something. So there's a lot of different things that they can do with these numbers here. They've got a lot of versatility inside, outside. But yes, the most exciting thing out of camp that I've heard so far is it sounds like Felix Anaduke-Uzama is looking much improved. Pass rushing with a plan, that hand fighting technique that he's been working on with Tom Bahali in the offseason is showing. And also it sounds like his get off has been a lot better. That's something that he kind of struggled with last year. Felt like he was slow to get off the ball. His release is better. And it sounds like he's working to the inside shoulder of the tackles quite a bit better. He's beating Wanya Morris and Kingsley Suamataia on that inside shoulder, which is good because that's kind of displaying a little bit more of the power element. And that's a part of his game that definitely needs some improvement. We've talked about when he came out of Lee Summit, he's a little bit small. His body built up to be what it was at Kansas State. And now he has to take that next step to get his body to be NFL edge offense or defense player body. So he's continuing his growth there. It does sound promising. And for him, the good news is like there's plenty of path for him to play. I'm still not penciling him in as a guy who's going to be playing, 70 or 80% of the defensive snaps. I still think he's someone that you're going to want to shelter from the run defense element of it. But if you can get, 5 sacks out of him, 5-7 sacks from him, that's a great second year for a guy who is always going to be a little bit more of a project pass rusher.
Oh, yeah. And Chiefs fans were banging the table for a guy like this in the draft for the past 4 or 5 seasons. I mean, we've been looking for that guy that can come in and be the Justin Houston heir apparent. This is kind of that guy. Now, is he going to be, as athletic or have as long as arms? Like, no, he's probably not going to be one of the greatest defensive ends to ever play the game. But, he's a guy that can come in and can contribute. And I look forward to seeing him do it. I mean, the dude has all the skills. He has all the ability. Just got to put it on the field.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go to linebackers here. Pretty straightforward. Not a lot of surprises here. For linebackers, we've got Nick Bolton, we've got Drew Tranquil, we have Jack Cochran, Leo Chanel, and Curtis Jacobs. So I ended up keeping 5 here. Obviously, a big part of that's just going to be special teams. They've used them quite consistently in special teams. And Curtis Jacobs, I just wanted to bang the table for him one more time. He's like been one of the first players on the practice field every time. He was out there the first day of pads. What more do you want? This guy, like he's the X-ray with the dog. He's got the dog in him. Okay, Curtis Jacobs, he's making the roster.
I agree. And, he's one of those guys that in a position that is not very deep. So he has the ability to get on the field, even if he's not one of the best linebackers in the league. But like, dude, I'm so surprised at his ability to come in. And like, there is something to be said about those guys, those players that come out and are the first ones on the field and the last ones to leave. And it seems like that's what Curtis Jacobs has been. Like, even if he is not the most incredible athletic, Fred Warner type of linebacker, like he's putting in the work. He's doing incredibly well in camp. Like, throw him on the roster. What could he hurt? Special teams demon. That's fine. Maybe a year or two. We'll move on.
Yeah, and I'm surprised we haven't heard any flash plays from him yet. Maybe that's coming. Also, the patch just came on, and that was just a couple days ago, so we'll see. But I'm still pretty bullish on him. Cornerback. So this one's been interesting. We've seen some injuries in this area. Jalen Watson's still not practicing. We've seen Najee Johnson kind of leave practice a couple of times and be limited with some soreness in his knee. There was a hamstring thing. So right now we've got Trent McDovey, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, Najee Johnson, Kamal Hadden, and Nick Jones. This one was tricky. Nick Jones, I think, and Kamal Hadden, I'm not sure both of those guys make the roster. Keith Taylor is someone who has been factoring into the defense some. He's someone who's played some NFL snaps before. And Echo Boydo is a guy who's, performed well in camp last year, has some tools. The reason why I say I'm not sure Kamal Hadden and Nick Jones both make it is because you feel pretty good about Shamari Connor being the first team slot. And I think Hadden has been mixing it into the slot quite a bit. We talked about that, about how, he didn't play the slot at all at Tennessee, and now he's mixing in there. Some of that's due to the arm length and agility. And that's where Nick Jones has played most of his snaps. So I wonder if all those guys make the roster. Maybe I have the wrong group, but I feel like that's probably the right number.
Yeah, no, I agree on the number. Special teams is, taking a step forward as far as, being an actual factor in NFL games this year. So we're going to see more players that are impact players on the special teams force. So having an extra cornerback in here or, 2 is not a problem that I have. The one thing I would say is that from everything that we have heard, I don't know how much of this is public knowledge or anything like that, but they are very high on Nick Jones. Nick Jones is a player who they really have some trust in. Steve Spagnuolo, Dave Merritt, both guys that love this player. I just have a hard time seeing him not make the roster. I know Kamal Hayden was just drafted, and we like to give the edge to those, late round DBs. They've been so productive for us in the past, but I can't see Nick Jones not being on the roster. I just can't. It's just with everything that we've heard, him being on the roster, I think is cemented at this point.
Okay. The chat just reminded me that I also left out tight ends. So real quick, I had 3 tight ends: Travis Kelce, Jared Wiley, and Noah Gray. Sorry, Freudian slip there with almost saying Blake Bell. I left Irv Smith off. This was written a couple of days ago. Irv Smith has kind of popped off at camp the last couple of days. Again, I think that's a spot that kind of like flex fullback, H-back type of role. That could be something that Irv Smith mixes into. They've kept 4 tight ends the last couple of years with how much 13 they're playing personnel-wise. So I'm totally open to Irv Smith maybe making the roster. I just want to real quick double back to the tight ends. I do have Travis Kelce making the roster just barely. He just barely makes the cut. Okay, so last group here is the safeties. Obviously, injuries are playing a factor in here. Right now, we're just going to assume that Justin Reed takes the field to start the season. I know there's some speculation about his injury. Right now, he's on the NFI list. We'll see. So I've got Justin Reed, Brian Cook, Shamari Connor, Jaden Hicks, and Deion Bush all making the roster. And it sounds like Jaden Hicks is just like the draft buzz was one thing, but it sounds like he is just really doing well in camp, running almost exclusively with the ones, making impact plays. It's hard not to get excited about Jaden Hicks looking in this defense, and this is just in camp.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of people, I know we want to keep this kind of brief, but a lot of people had him, a lot of draft analysts whose opinions I really respect, had him as the first safety in this year's draft. Now, it wasn't a particularly deep class. There was no Tyrann Mathieu. There was no
Brian
Eric
Branch.
Berry in the street. Yeah, Brian Branch. Nobody like that in this in this draft. But dude, I mean, he's the perfect prototypical Spag safety that could play anywhere on the field. He's athletic. He's big. He brings the hammer. Like, he's everything that Spags wants. And we got him pretty late into the draft. So, dude, I mean, I've just been like, I almost have an alert set up on my phone, it seems like, where anytime he's mentioned in a tweet, I get an update. And I'm ecstatic every single time that I see it. Like, I'm so excited to see him on the roster and playing legit snaps, which I think he absolutely will do this upcoming season. Other than that, though, I mean, Brian Cook's been fantastic. Pretty easy to slot in Justin Reed. So, yeah, I agree. Perfect.
It's been exciting to see the last couple of days, especially the first couple of days of pads, the offense struggle. I know that sounds weird, but you got to remember, like, both these teams, both the offense and defense, you want them to be good. So it's good to see a good battle back and forth. And I think you saw some of those first couple of days, the big highlight play to Xavier Worthy. Brian Cook was still kind of getting up to NFL speed. He was the person that was getting beat on those Worthy plays. They weren't quite ready for the speed of Brown and Worthy, especially without pads when they can't get their hands on them. But it's been good to see a bounce back from the defense these last couple of days. That will continue to be a pendulum that goes back and forth. But yeah, what I'm really excited about is if like Jaden Hicks is looking like this in camp, Justin Reed will come back. Having those guys both on the field is going to be such a chess piece element to the game. We've talked about Willie Gay being missing from this defense and kind of what his hybrid kind of apex defender role was in the defense. I think Jaden Hicks has a chance to be there. I don't think he's going to be Kyle Hamilton because Kyle Hamilton is one of the top safeties in the league, but I think there's potential there. Like Kyle Hamilton's a bigger guy. I don't think he's as twitchy of an athlete as Hamilton is, but if there's some sort of apex defender role out there for Hicks, I think it could be a really exciting addition to the Spagnuolo defense. Real quickly, the specialists just got 3 of them. Obviously, that's Harrison Butker. That's James Winchester, the long snapper, and then Matt Ariza, the new punter. Sounds like Ariza's leg is just, was a big part of what won him the job, that and being a lefty. He's going to have to, have some development there. There'll probably be a few growing pains. Hopefully the hold is something that he worked on a lot with Harrison Butker with the place kicking, but no surprises there as Ariza won the punting job out of OTAs. So that is my 53-man roster. If you want to read it for yourself or comment nice things, because that's all the comment section is on articles, you can check that out at Arrowhead Addict at the website, or you can check my Twitter. Okay, so last activity we're doing today, I want to do this. We've got just a few more weeks here to kind of do some hindsight. And I think hindsight is something that's really important. A lot of times people look at a trade and they think, trade, this trade's already been decided in year 1, or a draft pick. It's already, people are calling Felix Anudike-Uzomah a bust after year 1. You've got to let these things breathe a little bit. You've got to use some hindsight and let the full impact of a move be felt. All these times that we've gone through with the Chiefs dynasty here, we're able to look at these things in hindsight. So what we're going to do today is we're going to list the 5 most impactful moves of the Chiefs dynasty. Notice I didn't say best. I mean, this isn't a power ranking of your 5 favorite or the 5 best. These are the most impactful. Now, all these things had a positive impact on the roster, but they are the story of how the Chiefs won 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. So Christian and I, we used producer Richard here, to kind of filter our 5 things through to make sure we don't have a ton of overlap. But I don't know Christian's list and he doesn't know mine. So we're going to share it. And what I think it'd be best if we just both read our 5. I'll go first and then you can read yours, Christian, and then we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit. So these, again, reminder, this isn't a power ranking. So this isn't 1 through 5. These are just bullet points. So I have, and this is 2019 through 2023. We want to stay away from like drafting Patrick Mahomes, drafting Travis Kelce, signing Andy Reid as coach. Like we want to stay away from those things because those things are, 1, painfully obvious. Last thing I'll say, because I'm adding like 20 precursors to this, but the spirit of the activity, it exists in a bubble here. This is not entry-level Chiefs fandom here, okay? If you want to do that, that's totally cool. There's a place for that, and we've got lots of great shows here at Arrowhead Addict. But we may not be the 500-level course here, but we're at least the 300-level course. We can all acknowledge that the Chiefs did certain things to win 3 Super Bowls in 5 years that weren't exactly the exact way you want to do it, okay? Just because the Chiefs drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire at pick 32 isn't the way that you wanted that to go. It's not like they had to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire to win the next 2 Super Bowls. That wasn't the right move. We can all agree upon that. So when we say these things, please don't go, what do you know? They won 3 Super Bowls. Like, they obviously know what they were doing. So, like we can all acknowledge that process and results aren't always the same thing. And just because the results were great, which they were, doesn't mean that the process was the right process. Okay. All 10 precursors are done. Let me read my 5 here. And then Christian, you can read your 5. My 5 most impactful moves of the Chiefs dynasty are the Chiefs being able to keep Travis Kelce on a cheap, controllable contract. The Frank Clark trade and sign, I should say. The Frank Clark trade and sign. The Tyreek Hill trade. The Chiefs releasing Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz on the same day. And the Chiefs bringing in Steve Spagnuolo as the defensive coordinator. Those are my 5.
Okay. That last one is my first one. That's the first one that I thought of.
Okay, and I mean, we're going to have some overlap.
Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. We can deep dive into it. My second one is moving on from stars like Bill Belichick, like getting rid of guys earlier rather than later. Keeping Dave Merritt and Steve Spagnuolo together. That was a very important piece of this dynasty. Rebuilding the offensive line in one off season, and then stability at the positions of power. So that's Andy Reid, keeping all those guys on the roster in positions and not having a bunch of turnover like you normally see.
Okay, cool. You said something about Bill Belichick in there. Who was that again?
Yeah.
What was that?
Okay, so moving on from guys like Bill Belichick. So Bill Belichick is very well-known defensive coordinator, basically ran the Patriots for however long. Are you familiar with Bill Belichick?
Yeah. I just don't get how that's a Chiefs move. Are you meaning the fact that the league moved on from them? Like how the
Chiefs move on from guys earlier rather than later. Like we saw that with
I get what you mean. Okay.
We see Tyrann Mathieu, we see Tyreek Hill, like all of those guys kind of combined into one. So I maybe went a little big picture with this, but I think, we can overlap a little bit on
Okay,
this.
so you're meaning like the ability to move on from a player too soon rather than too late. Like Tyrann Mathieu, they've done this with some other players where there's about 3 guys on this roster that we're protecting, and they're the ultimate trump cards, and everyone else, no one's safe. That type of
100%
mentality they've had. Okay, cool. That makes sense. All right, so let's just alternate here. So I'll dig into the weeds here a little bit. So the first one I came up with is the Chiefs being able to keep Travis Kelce on a cheap wide receiver contract or a tight end contract. This is something that I think is really underrated. The Chiefs' ability to do one of these other moves on my list, trade Tyreek Hill, was because they had a true wide receiver 1 or top weapon in the league in Travis Kelce, and how much they had to pay him is so cheap relative to the production he's had. In the last 6 seasons, Travis Kelce ranks 4th among all receiving yards, and he's tied for 4th in touchdowns. So that means he's 4th in receiving yards over the last 6 years and 4th in touchdowns over the last 4 years. The only players who have more receiving yards than Travis Kelce in the last 6 years are Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. By the way, the APY on those players that I just listed, Tyreek Hill, $30 million per year. Devontae Adams, $28 million per year. Stephon Diggs, $22.5 million. And then there's Travis Kelce, who this year just reworked his deal, $17 million. Travis Kelce has production of a wide receiver 1, but you pay him half of what you pay those guys. And yes, Travis Kelce has consistently been the top 2 or 3 paid tight end at his position, but he could have taken an Aaron Donald deal. Like Aaron Donald, when he was getting ready to retire, he took a deal that basically broke the defensive tackle market because he was worth it. And Travis Kelce is worth that. He is by far and has been by far the tight end 1 in the NFL. And he chose to take a market deal rather than a market resetting deal, a market altering deal. And that has been something that has allowed the Chiefs offense to be multiple, whether it was with Tyreek Hill or with Juju Smith-Schuster, or now with, winning a Super Bowl when they basically had Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco, and that was the whole offense. So that has been huge for the Chiefs roster construction and has allowed a lot of cap flexibility when they're paying a top quarterback.
Yeah, and I agree. If you remember the Legion of Zoom, with Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, Cole Hardman, those guys, I mean, Tyreek Hill would have been on the roster because he was having like kind of a special sort of situation with him. But Sammy Watkins is not on this roster if Travis Kelce isn't taking a pay cut. 90% of the offenses you see in the NFL, you see it with the 49ers now, where it's like, hey, we got to move on from somebody. We got to get rid of somebody so we can keep the core of this roster together. The Chiefs didn't have to do that when Travis Kelce got paid. Like, it was very much of, let's try to win Super Bowls. Let's prioritize winning. And as a Chiefs fan, I don't see how Travis Kelce is not like as your all-time greatest Kansas City sports player. I could see like some George Brett's thrown in there, Patrick Mahomes as well, just because he's such a stud. But like, no, Travis Kelce is up there as a fan favorite. Absolutely incredible because he's done everything that you want an NFL athlete to do, and that's be incredibly great and incredibly selfless. I mean, $14 million isn't nothing to sneeze at, but like he could be making, I mean, probably should be making like 25 mil per year.
Yeah, and I think something that like deserves some recognition is like there's a lot of coaches in the league who have clamps on their players. Gronk was a huge personality, but Gronk was not what he was in media like Travis Kelce is. Andy Reid allows his players to be themselves, to have a highly successful podcast in season that they're doing weekly, to be, a big marketing superstar as well, and do these commercials and stuff. Like, I think that's a big part of why Patrick Mahomes isn't a top paid quarterback right now. And I think that's a part of why Travis Kelce has been, a little bit more comfortable with taking less than he might be worth, because his coach gives him the ability to be an individual and do some of those things. And it helps when you're a great player. Obviously, no one wants to buy, tennis shoes from like the 20th best tight end in the league. But I think like Andy Reid deserves some credit here too as well. So let's go on to your next one, Christian.
All right, so maybe we can overlap here. You can do your hiring Steve Spagnuolo take right after mine. We could talk about it together. So firing Bob Sutton and hiring Steve Spagnuolo is my next one. That was it wasn't a controversial take because, the Chiefs defense the year that they let go of Bob Sutton was one of the worst in the league. But it was definitely a move that I don't think a lot of people were anticipating. There were a lot of other coaches, defensive coordinators that had legitimate experience that people wanted on the roster for the defense. And even like a year or two after that, people were like, Steve Spagnuolo sucks. We hate him. He's not as good as we could have had. Like, I know Vic Fangio was on the market at one point and they passed him up to stay with Steve Spagnuolo. That could not have been a better decision. So I went through the numbers the other day when we were preparing for this, and I looked up like what's the points per game the defenses are allowing across this whole entire span we're looking at here since he was hired and since this past season. Like what's he given up in the playoffs points per game? It's 22 points per game. Now, you might think of that and say, oh, well, it was 21 points per game in the regular season this past year was the average. That's not incredible. You look at the other teams, they're averaging 27 points per game allowed. So this is an all-time great defensive coordinator. I understand that like that Eagles Super Bowl might have tainted your opinion of him, his ability to hold, incredible offenses to low points. But like, dude, 7 points allowed against the Dolphins this past year. It's like the Baltimore Ravens this past season just absolutely got smacked in the mouth and couldn't do anything about it. Even in the Super Bowl, 20 points, 49ers. Like, dude, he's pitching shutouts, the NFL equivalent of a shutout. And he's getting buzz. I don't want to say that like he is getting no recognition for this because obviously he's being talked about as one of the best defensive coordinators. But like, dude, that was such an underrated move in the moment. And now we're reaping the rewards of getting a guy who shut out Tom Brady in the Super Bowl as your defensive coordinator. Like, we could not have asked for a better hire at that position.
And I think you went right to where I went to with some of this, and that was kind of the tone of the hiring of Steve Spagnuolo. First off, we talk about like how these moves and how impactful they were. We're doing the Chiefs dynasty, but I think one thing that's worth noting too is like the Chiefs waited too long to fire Bob Sutton. I think almost every person agrees with that. In 2018, that offense was certainly capable of winning the Super Bowl. And if it had been the defense being able to get a single stop in the second half and in overtime, the Chiefs probably do win the Super Bowl that year because the Rams offense had gotten brutalized over the last couple of years. And, we saw that Super Bowl with the Patriots and the Rams, and they scored 3 points in that Super Bowl. The Rams did. I feel pretty confident about the Chiefs winning that Super Bowl. We could have been talking about a dynasty starting sooner if Bob Sutton would have utilized his talent better. And I really think when we talk about Steve Spagnuolo, that's one of the best things that he does. There was talent on that defense. Yes, the secondary was rough. And you had Eric Berry, who was kind of at that time, like, not even sure if he was wanting to play football. He barely played that season. The linebacking core there was pretty brutal as well. But there was some great pass rushers. I mean, Justin Houston and Dee Ford had terrific seasons that year. Chris Jones had 15.5 sacks that year. There was talent on that defense, but it wasn't being utilized the right way. You had those moments where you see Justin Houston covering Antonio Brown out in space, like down the field. Like, what are we doing here? And that's something that Steve Spagnuolo has done such a good job of. You take a player like Leo Chanel, who has a very specific skill set that might not fit in every scheme, someone would have tried to pigeonhole into a role that might have involved coverage. Or Jaden Hicks, like another player that like, people had some concerns because of his size and his agility as far as his size goes. But you feel really good about Spagnuolo taking him in. And you also brought up a good point. What was the mood whenever Steve Spagnuolo was brought in? A lot of people at this point, Andy Reid hasn't won a Super Bowl. Oh, look, here's Andy taking care of one of his buddies again. You've got, Steve Spagnuolo, who had this awful stint as the Rams coach. Whenever he was there, he was the interim coach. Whenever Sean Payton was, suspended for the Spygate issue, his defenses, the last 3 years that he was a coach, 30th, second. So we had a weird season with the Giants. I don't even remember the season Ben McAdoo was head coach, but they were second defense in points allowed. And then 29th. And then he was fired. Took a year off and then came to the Chiefs. So this was not some move that a lot of people were super high on whenever it happened. I think a lot of people, remember some of the highs of his time before he came to Kansas City. Obviously, the Giants Super Bowl against that incredible Patriots team. But this was not a move that everyone was super bullish on. There were other up-and-comers that people liked. But having that executive defensive coach who can run the defense so Andy Reid can focus on the offense, that's something that's really important. And I love to see from coaches where they are, the offensive guy or the defensive guy. Hire an OC or DC for the other unit, someone who can really run and control the team. And I know we're not talking about him, but Dave Tobe, he's the assistant head coach as well. Andy Reid being able to delegate those things to them so he can focus on the offense, it's a move that I think really matters to how this team runs.
Oh, yeah. And think of it kind of like a PC where it's like you have 13, 16, or 16, 24 gigabytes of RAM. It's like, dude, as a head coach, you can only focus on so much at one point in time. And that's where a lot of coaches get caught up. Like Steve Spagnuolo is an incredible defensive coordinator. He was an okay head coach. It's the only works here because Andy Reid can delegate and he trusts them. Now, he could be in a million other situations. Steve Spagnuolo gets another head coaching job, which I don't think he ever will, to be clear. But he wouldn't be as good as he is right now if he was on any other team. And I think that can only be said for a handful of teams that have the head coach that's willing to just hand that over, whole side of the football, to a defensive coordinator that he really trusts and respects. So, yeah, love Steve Spagnuolo. And they've done an incredible job with hiring him and bringing him on.
All right, let's move on to my third one here. My third one was the Frank Clark trade and sign. So in 2019, the Chiefs sent their first round pick, a 2020 second round pick, and a swap of third round picks in 2019. Later on that day, Frank Clark agreed to a contract with the Chiefs that was 5 years, $105.5 million with $63.5 million guaranteed. Seahawks, I always like to do this. Go back and look at what actually happened with those picks from the trade. Are there some players that the Chiefs desperately missed out on because of this trade? Here's what Seattle did with those picks. That first round pick that they took from the Chiefs, they drafted LJ Collier, who has 3 career sacks and 26 tackles in his career. So he's no longer with the Seahawks as well. So you feel pretty good on missing out on LJ Collier as compared to having Frank Clark on the team. Then there's a lot of pick swaps and trades. The Seahawks that year in 2019, they were very low on draft picks from the Jamal Adams trade. So they used those picks a lot to kind of maneuver around the board. Here were some other players that were involved in the draft picks that the Chiefs sent to the Seahawks. Cody Barton, Marquise Blair, Hugo Amadi, Travis Homer, and DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf, they packaged 2 picks, one of which was from the Chiefs, to move up to the 64th pick in the second round to draft DK Metcalf. So that's probably the best player that was a part of the Frank Clark trade. I also thought it was notable. I want to mention this. In 2019, the Green Bay Packers signed Zadarius Smith as a free agent for 4 years, $66 million deal with $20 million guaranteed. So a lot less than Frank Clark caught. Also, they didn't have to trade the pick. Frank Clark, in his time in Kansas City in the regular season, had 23.5 sacks in 4 years. I couldn't believe this. Frank Clark had more sacks in Seattle than he did in Kansas City in his career. That surprised me. Now, his 10.5 career playoff sacks in Kansas City is the most in Chiefs history. I think when we talk about Frank Clark and whether this is a good move and everything, like, you just have to go back to that. I'm still of the belief that the Frank Clark trade was probably more of a negative than it was as a positive. He struggled to stay on the field because of some of health issues that cropped up with him. The productivity wasn't great when he was on the field. He had some off the field issues that got him suspended. But what he brought in the playoffs, it's hard to argue that was anything that they could have gotten anywhere else. And it's one thing we forget is that the Texans game in the 2019 playoffs, Chris Jones missed that game. And Frank Clark really showed up in that game. I believe he had 3 sacks in that game. So, this is one that like I'm much more neutral on. I do think that they could have gotten it maybe from someone else, like a Zadarius Smith, who was much cheaper, and then you would have had picks. But you do feel a little bit better whenever you hear like a name like LJ Collier is the guy that was used with that first round pick. So Frank Clark trade, your thoughts?
We're called the Intangibles. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about some of Frank Clark's intangibles: leadership, clutchness, ability to pull a locker room together and be the leader that you need for them to be. Dude, he was everything that the Chiefs needed at that point in time, minus the regular season production. Like, would we have loved if he came out and had like a 20 sack season like Nick Bosa? Like, yeah, obviously that would have been incredible. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. All he did was show up and give you 3 sacks in a playoff game, or seal 2 straight playoffs games. That postseason run that we had where we won the Super Bowl. Like, dude, he was he was just everything that the Chiefs needed in a time where they needed it the most. And as we just talked about Steve Spagnuolo, for him to utilize him in the way that he was utilized, and putting him out there on late downs in the biggest moments, pushing him to where he needed to be, like, that's exactly the type of player that they need. I know I keep saying it, but that's just so it's just
well, and
so true.
I think you bring up a good point. Our friends over at Sports Radio 810, they have Anthony Sherman and Garrick Dieter on a lot of times on their morning show, and they've talked about before that, like, that first camp after they made all those moves on defense, the tone that was set by Frank Clark in practice, that, like, he was giving everyone the business, giving them the MFers and really giving them all the business that they wanted in practice. And it was just a cultural shift and a mentality shift. And I think that, like, you said, the intangibles, these are the type of things we can't measure. I think, like, when you look at on paper, you look at the Frank Clark trade, it probably was a net negative, but those type of things, and seeing how beloved he was by Chris Jones, and you're certainly happy with the way Chris Jones has developed in the latter part of his career, and something we'll never be able to measure. The Chiefs chose not to bring him back this past year after he was with the Broncos and did go back to Seattle. It looks like he's just probably done as far as a player goes. But no matter what, like, his name, it's going in the Ring of Honor. You're the playoff leader in sacks. He was a part of so many big game closing sacks for the Chiefs. He's his time. You can't say you regret it. We'll put it that way for sure. All right, Christian, let's move on to your next one.
Yeah, that kind of perfectly leads into the next one, which is moving on from players like Bill Belichick style. Like, Frank Clark was a leader. He was the playoff sacks leader. He was still productive in the postseason, and we got rid of him. Tyrann Mathieu, incredible player. I know we don't get to see a lot because he's not shit talking on Twitter to every Chiefs fan, but, like, dude, he was really productive last year in New Orleans. Like, those are just 2 examples. Justin Houston, D Ford, Tyreek Hill, all guys that we moved on from maybe a little bit earlier than we should have, or right at the perfect time. Like, we talk about stocks a little bit on this show, like buying and selling players when their stock is the lowest and stock is the highest. Like, dude, D Ford, his stock was at the highest when we sold him. Like, he had a pretty good regular season, had some postseason production. He had that one slip up against the Patriots, and then we traded him to San Francisco, and he did absolutely nothing. Did anybody hear D Ford's name when he played for the 49ers? No. Okay, Justin Houston, guy who still has some, I think, a little bit left in the tank. Needed a culture change, got rid of him. Tyrann Mathieu, same thing. Anthony Hitchens, like, still a productive player. Maybe not Nick Bolton, maybe not Leo Chanel, but still a guy that, is making impact plays in the NFL. Gone. Leaders of the defense.
I'll actually stop you right there. Anthony Hitchens never played another NFL snap after the AFC Championship game against the Bengals. Yeah, that's true. It's something that, like, I will take to my grave that they didn't play Nick Bolton more in that game. Anthony Hitchens, like, took like a lion's share of the snaps in the AFC Championship game against the Bengals, and then never played another NFL snaps. But
yeah, I must have been thinking of not Bashad Breeland, but Breeland,
or Damian Wilson. Damian Wilson, like,
he
played a few more years. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and I do think that this is something that, like, understanding, like, a lot of this starts getting nostalgic. Like, I think there's a nice comparison here to the Royals. The Royals, when they won their 2015 World Series, 2016 they were a French playoff team. They just missed the playoffs. 2017 they keep all the guys: Eric Hosmer, Lorenzo Cain, Mike Moustakas, Salvador Perez. They make a small move moving Wade Davis to the Cubs, but for the most part they try to keep that core together. And honestly, that was probably the time to start selling some of those pieces and trading them before they all walked in free agency. They had this huge wave of their World Series roster walk in free agency, and they were locked into those players because of the nostalgia of Eric Hosmer sliding into home base on the, that ground ball and all the things that made them Super Bowl World Series champions. But like the ability to move on from those players and keep in mind what the bigger goal is, it's something that is so important. And baseball is a little bit hard comparison because you can have the best player in baseball. The Angels literally had Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout and like didn't do anything. So like that's that's like, Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs football is a little bit different, but they didn't get locked into those guys. They sticked with their three. And then one of your points that you're about to bring up here is the consistency at the top with the pillars with Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, front office, Brett Veach, those type of things. That they let that be the main story. And that's what matters, right? Not getting tied into these players just because like, oh, Tyrann Mathieu made big plays that one time and sticking with 18 players.
Yeah. And do we want to move on to the next one? I mean,
sure. So I'll go. I can't remember. Did you have the Tyreek Hill trade?
I kind of lumped it in with that one.
So so Tyreek Hill trade, obviously this one is pretty self-explanatory. Chiefs send Tyreek Hill to Miami for a 2022 first round pick, a second round pick, and a fourth round pick plus fourth and sixth round pick, and the following the 2023 draft. Chiefs used several of those picks, kind of like what the Seahawks did, to package up for other players, but the main players that they received in return, besides a plenty of cap space flexibility, is Trent McDuffie with the number 21 overall pick, and Sky Moore with the number 54 pick. And then they used pick 100, who was a Dolphins pick as well, to trade for Kadarius Toney. I know that's kind of a mixed bag because like Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney make us feel a certain way after last year, but you got to remember Kadarius Toney, probably one of the most splashiest player in a Super Bowl that the Chiefs needed 38 points to win. Sky Moore caught a huge touchdown in that game, despite the fact that he was more open than anyone has ever been in the NFL. And then Trent McDuffie just became an All-Pro. So this one, obviously, more than anything, me and you got on a podcast when we were doing a show other places, and the night that the Chiefs traded Tyreek Hill. And I remember saying, this makes me more confident about the Chiefs than I have ever been, because they are realizing the big picture and realizing that they have to build this thing for the long haul, and their ability to do that. And then the insane hit rate that they had in that draft class. That draft class was so good in 2022 that you don't even care that Darian Kennard and Sky Moore have done mostly nothing, because you've got contributors from the 7th round in Watson and Pacheco. You have an all-pro in the first round. It truly was a historic draft, and that was all kicked off by this move and having the confidence in Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes having the wherewithal to not say, hey, don't trade my weapon. This is my guy. This is my boy. Don't trade him. He was willing to try something new. And I think this helped a lot with his development too. We saw in the AFC Championship game, as that game was coming to a close and they lost in Arrowhead to the Bengals, he was locked in on Tyreek Hill, double covered, because he was, it was a Kelsey and Hill offense, and that's what it was. And this pushed him to be a different player, and I think we've seen the fruits of that these last 2 years.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of people forget that the pick that we traded, Miami's fourth rounder, to go up and grab Rashee Rice this past year, that was from Miami. That was still from that Tyreek Hill trade. We were still reaping the rewards from that last offseason. So that trade, it made such an impact on our team and on the league. And we're kind of seeing a shift. Brett Veach gets a lot of credit, and I'll give him his flowers every single day of the week. Here's another point to make about that. Dude, the entire league is kind of changing, and we're seeing wide receivers going elsewhere to get paid. We might see that with CeeDee Lamb. We might see that with Brandon Ayuk. Those are two players that probably should have gotten massive extensions that haven't yet. And I think partially is because everybody's seen what the Tyreek Hill trade did to the Kansas City Chiefs. And, if you trust your front office, you trust the people in charge of making those decisions, it's a no-brainer. You're literally getting every aspect of a trade you're winning. Getting the players back. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, to illustrate how fortunate the Chiefs were in the situation, look at some of the other teams that have decided to make this similar move with their star receiver. Look at what the Titans did when they traded away AJ Brown and how that's gone. Mm-hmm. Look at what the Bills just got in return for Stephon Diggs, a player who was actually above Travis Kelce's name on that list, right? He was right up there with Tyreek Hill's name, and they held on to him for longer. He's an older player, and they didn't get nearly as much in return. And we don't know what those picks are going to become. We already know what the A.J. Brown trade is, but we don't know what the Stephon Diggs trade is going to look like for the Bills. But again, the Chiefs pressed the button at the right time. And I think that says a lot about the forward thinking of this front office and what it meant for the roster long term.
Yeah. So let me move on to my number 4 here. rebuilding the offensive line in one offseason. Now, I won't say completely, but rebuilding, retooling the interior offensive line in particular. So in that offseason, the Chiefs traded for Orlando Brown Jr., essentially just a pick swap, first for a second. They got Joe Thuney in free agency, drafted Creed, and then got Trey Smith. That is an absurd amount of moves in an offseason where, like you, I think, are about to bring up, getting rid of Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, your bookend tackles in the previous offseason, or in that same offseason. So you're getting essentially stability at the interior offensive line. And we talk about how important stability is for certain positions. Offensive line is maybe the most important position for stability outside of quarterback. Excuse me. The interior offensive line is set for the next 4 years, or was set for the next 4 years, and they're going to sign one of them, maybe re-sign Joe Thuney. That's 2 positions in the interior offensive line that are going to be set for another 4, 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, the Orlando Brown thing didn't work out exactly how we planned it to be, but we got what we needed out of him. We won a Super Bowl with him, and he went off to greener pastures. I think everybody is okay with what happened there. Like, it was just an incredible sequence of moves in one offseason that completely retooled, reset, added stability to a position where there was so much insecurity and sort of question marks going into that offseason.
One thing that I'll bring up too that I don't think got enough recognition is, like, everyone knows what they did at the top of that roster with all the starters that they acquired, but also the depth, right? Like they brought back Mike Rimmers that year. They drafted Lucas Niang previously to that. He came back from that COVID year. They brought in Kyle Long as depth too. Like, not only did they improve the ceiling, but they also dramatically raised the floor of that position. Andrew Wiley was still on the roster as well. They did a lot to really improve that. And I think that they deserved recognition for that as well, because part of what happened in that Super Bowl wasn't just that their starters got hurt, is that their backups were really bad. They committed to moving on from a lot of players that were along the offensive line. And that dramatic shift and being able to do that one offseason, it really was crazy. This actually kind of relays really nicely into my next one. And that was the Chiefs moving on from Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz on the same day. Obviously, we know that Eric Fisher tears his Achilles in the AFC Championship game. Mitchell Schwartz goes bad that same season. The Chiefs, their offensive line for a long time was built around 2 bookend tackles that were excellent, and then just kind of making it work on the interior. The Chiefs completely switched their mentality here, and moving on from those 2 tackles has been something that haunts the Chiefs to this day. Since that time, here are the tackles that have started meaningful games for the Chiefs: Mike Rimmers, Lucas Niang, Andrew Wiley, Orlando Brown, Juwan Taylor, Donovan Smith, and now Wanya Morris. Mike Rimmers started 4 games. Lucas Niang started 12 games. The Chiefs we're still talking in a weekly podcast about who's going to play left tackle for the Chiefs since Eric Fisher has left. We had the short-term answer in Orlando Brown. I think, like, I'm also wrapping the Orlando Brown trade into this move here too. That one's that's been tough. The Chiefs, they send a first, a third, and a 4th round pick and for Orlando Brown, and then they do a swap of first and second with Baltimore. That actually worked out really good because that allowed the Chiefs to get Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton in the same draft. But the Chiefs, they were able to use Orlando Brown. He was a huge improvement at left tackle, was really good in the run game. And something else that's kind of a sliding glass doors moment here is the Chiefs at one point, they offered Orlando Brown a 6-year, $139 million deal that was reported, and he declined it back when they were kind of doing the contract thing with him. He ends up leaving Kansas City. They don't tag him. He goes and signs with the Bengals for, a 4-year, $64 million deal with $31 million guaranteed. And then the Chiefs pivot and sign Juwan Taylor for 4 for $80 with $60 million guaranteed. So they signed Juwan Taylor for less than they would have signed Orlando Brown for. They move on from another left tackle after trading picks for him. Probably the most notable player that the Ravens drafted with those picks that the Chiefs sent them was Odafe Owe, who is, a decent edge player, not great, but decent. But edge rush has been a never-ending hole for the Ravens over the years. And then they hand a left tackle via free agency to one of their direct rivals. So, like, this one that's not, it's another one of those that, like, I'm not completely sold that this is the only way it could have went. But it was interesting. Like, maybe, keeping Orlando, like, how different would this look right now if Orlando Brown was here on that contract and the Chiefs are looking for a right tackle instead of a left tackle? Jawan Taylor, I think we all want to see better results from him this year, but he is worth less than, what they offered Orlando Brown. But Orlando Brown's on a very similar contract to Jawan Taylor right now. Could they have gotten the deal that the Bengals signed him to? I'm not sure. That's something that, like, if I could have had Orlando Brown on the deal he's on at the Bengals, I'd be pretty interested in that. I'm not sure why that didn't end up happening. I think there's probably just some bad blood with the negotiation of the contract and those type of things. But the Eric Fisher, Mitchell Schwartz, that was a totally franchise-altering move that happened. So, looks like we just lost Christian here. Maybe might be some internet issues, but yeah, you just can't say enough about like what it meant for that, because there's a chance that Mitchell Schwartz still would have been playing pretty good football at this point, or that Eric Fisher, could have still been playing into their 30s. But instead, you end up with needing to replace both tackles, and the Chiefs did a masterful job of doing that. And it took some time and it took some draft capital, but it's something that they're still investing in. Hopefully, Kingsley Suamataia is that guy who can fill in. But we're going to go and call that a podcast unless we get Christian back here in the next minute here. We really appreciate you all listening. We love what we're building here at Arrowhead Addict. We think we've got a lot of great shows lined up here. Really encourage you to listen to every day on the show. We've got a live stream going on. We've got the Top 50 Chiefs, a great project that we've been doing. And we encourage you to become a member of Arrowhead Addict. For just a really small fee, you can join our premium Discord. We've got our fantasy football leagues that are going on as well. These are really competitive fantasy football leagues with some guys who really love ball. It's a great place to talk during Chiefs games and vent, of course. And we'll be in there talking with you guys as well. Thank you to producer Richard. Thank you to Christian, even though he's no longer with us. It looks like he dropped off the live stream. And thank you all for listening. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And as always, go Chiefs.